Somewhere in rural Ohio, in the late summer of 1934, a woman knelt between rows of tomato plants with a small bucket beside her. As she pulled weeds from the soil, she gathered nearly 2 pounds of a thick, leafy plant her family would cook for supper that night. She did not think of it as a health food or a superfood. To her, it was just pigweed. That plant, now sold as purslane, is the highest plant source of omega-3 on Earth. Higher than spinach, even higher than some fish. Today, the same plant she pulled out of her garden for free sits behind a refrigerated case at Whole Foods for $8 a bag. Somewhere along the way, somebody figured out how to charge us for it. That plant is number 20 on this list. Number 12 is the seed of a plant you have probably been stepping on in vacant lots your whole life that now sells packed like quinoa for $12 a pound. Number 6 is the most nutrient-dense food on Earth, a leafy green still growing wild in cold creeks east of the Mississippi. And number 1 is probably climbing the fence behind your shed, even though stores sell it in little dark bottles for $25 an ounce. These are 20 plants ordinary America families once grew, gathered, or pulled up by the handful before they became expensive health trends. Most of these plants never disappeared. They are still here. What disappeared was the part of America that knew how valuable they were. And once that knowledge died with the generation that carried it, the same supermarket chains that had stopped carrying these plants spent the next 40 years figuring out how to put them back in a plastic box and charge us a premium for the privilege. And once you realize that, you start looking at the produce aisle a little differently. Before we continue, hit subscribe. I'm going to dig up many more of these before we're done. Let me start with the one your grandmother almost certainly pulled out of her garden every August. Number 20. Purslane. If your great-grandmother had a kitchen garden anywhere between Pennsylvania and Oklahoma, she pulled this plant out of it every summer of her adult life. She probably did not have a polite name for it. In her seed catalog, the company that had sold her tomato starts called it Golden Purslane and listed 2 varieties at 5 cents a packet. In her kitchen, she called it pigweed, or just weed, depending on the day she was having with it. She also ate it most days. Through July and August, when the spinach had bolted and the lettuce had turned bitter in the heat, purslane was what stayed green. The leaves came in thick and almost waxy, the color of jade against the dirt. They snapped between your teeth like celery and tasted somewhere between lemon and spinach, a little salty if the soil was right, faintly peppery if it was not. She cooked it down with pork fat and onions or tossed it raw into bean salads. What she did not know, what nobody knew until a research lab finally measured it in the late 1980s, was that the plant she was pulling out of her tomato beds carried more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy plant on Earth, more magnesium per ounce than spinach, more vitamin E than almost any green in the modern produce aisle. Her tired summer salad was a nutritional event. Then, slowly, between roughly 1955 and 1975, purslane vanished from American gardens. The seed catalogs dropped it first. The extension offices stopped recommending it. The supermarket era had no slot for a leafy green that wilted in 8 hours and could not be stacked in a crate. By the time the next generation came up, the only Americans still eating purslane were the immigrant grandmothers from Mexico, Greece, and Lebanon, who had never bothered to ask permission. You can still buy it at Whole Foods today, $8 for a small plastic box that weighs about as much as a deck of cards. The same plant that used to fill a 5-gallon bucket out of one woman's tomato patch in an afternoon. Most of America forgot purslane was food. The plant, of course, did not forget anything. It is probably growing in your sidewalk crack right now. Number 19. Dandelion greens. There is probably one growing in your driveway crack right now. The same plant that American homeowners spend most of every spring trying to kill with herbicide is the richest in vitamin K of any leafy green ever studied. 1 cup of raw dandelion greens carries 500% of an adult's daily vitamin K, more vitamin A per ounce than almost any other leafy green, and more antioxidants than spinach. Your great-grandmother boiled them in pork stock every March because that was what was available. A cup of cooked lamb's quarters carries more calcium than a glass of milk and more than twice the protein of kale. The plant grows 2 feet tall in disturbed soil and is generally pulled out by gardeners as a nuisance. Farmers markets and specialty stores sell small bunches under the name wild spinach for around $6. The Mexican kitchen still uses it daily. Number 17. Stinging nettle. Anyone who has brushed bare skin against a patch of nettle in late spring carries the memory in their forearm forever. The same plant, cooked for 2 minutes in salted water, contains one of the highest protein contents of any leafy green in North America. The English drank nettle soup through both world wars to stretch their rations. Modern herbalists now sell nettle tincture for $30 an ounce. It is growing wild along the edge of every wooded stream in the country. If you grew up walking barefoot in the country before 1960, you almost certainly know number 16. Plantain, not the banana, the flat-ribbed oval leaf weed that grows in compacted soil at the edge of every parking lot in America. Country mothers grabbed plantain any time a child came in bleeding or stung. A kid runs in with a bee sting on the back of the leg. The mother walks out the back door, finds a plantain leaf in the dirt, rinses it under the spigot, chews it for a few seconds to bruise the leaf, then presses it onto the sting. By the next morning, the swelling is down. That was the routine in 1,000 farmhouse kitchens through the 1940s and the 1950s. The plant carries a compound called allantoin that accelerates skin healing and reduces inflammation. The pharmaceutical industry isolated it and put it into modern wound creams and anti-aging serums. A small tube of allantoin cream now costs about $14 at the pharmacy. The plant itself is a 5-second search in any city park, growing in the cracks between paving stones along the chain-link fence behind the school. Number 15 was a tree that used to be everywhere, the mulberry. If you grew up before 1980, you probably had one somewhere on your block, and you probably remember the sidewalk underneath it staining deep purple every June. The fruit was so abundant that nobody bothered to pick it. Mulberries carry 7 times more resveratrol than red grapes, ounce for ounce. That is the antioxidant red wine is famous for, the heart protective compound that gets all the press in the longevity studies. Health food stores now sell dried mulberries for $18 a pound. The trees were ripped out of suburbs in the 70s because of the sidewalk stains. Number 14. Wild black raspberry. This is distinct from the cultivated black raspberry sold in plastic boxes at the grocery store. The wild variety contains one of the highest known concentrations of ellagic acid, a compound that researchers at Ohio State have studied for decades for its cancer prevention potential. These wild plants still grow along the edge of almost every Midwestern hedgerow. The cultivated berries at the grocery store cost about $7 a half pint. The wild ones, ripening in July, are free to anyone who knows what they are looking at. Number 13. Sumac. The red cones you pass on every highway in the eastern United States. The ones that look almost decorative along the median in October. Native American cooks called it Indian lemonade. The dried ground berries carry one of the highest antioxidant scores ever measured in a plant. Modern Middle Eastern cooking uses sumac as a routine spice, and a small jar sells for around $8. The wild bushes produce more sumac in a single fall than most American families could use in a decade. Which brings me to number 12, and a story I want to tell properly. Number 12. Amaranth. The plant had been cultivated in the Valley of Mexico for thousands of years before any Europeans saw it. By the time the Aztecs built their capital city, amaranth ranked alongside maize and beans as one of their 3 staple crops. By 1450, 20,000 tons of it flowed into that capital every year. Men brought it in on foot from 17 separate provinces, walking for days. It went into the temples as much as it went into the kitchens. On the festival days, the priests ground the seed into a flour. They mixed the flour with honey, and in some ceremonies with blood, into a dough. They shaped the dough into figures of their war god. The procession carried the figures through the city. Worshippers broke them apart and ate them in what looked to the Spanish, when they finally arrived, almost exactly like their own communion. The plant itself was a striking thing, 6 or 7 feet tall in good soil, with brick red and purple seed plumes hanging at the top, heavy enough that they nodded in the wind. The grain inside the plumes was pale, almost the color of cream, each seed smaller than the head of a pin. When the Aztecs toasted the seeds in a hot clay pan, they popped open like miniature popcorn, white and crisp, with a faintly grassy, nutty taste. A handful, ground and stirred into water, would carry a working man through a day in the fields. Then, in August of 1521, the Aztec capital fell to the Spanish. By the early 1520s, the open cultivation of amaranth had largely ended. The Spanish had seen what the seed was used for, and the practice could not continue under the new order. The grain moved from open fields into hidden corners. The punishment for keeping it going was severe. Anyone caught growing amaranth could have their hands cut off. By some accounts, Hernán Cortés himself gave the order, the same conquistador who had just taken the city. Most planters stopped. A few kept it alive in the southern Mexican highlands, far enough from the colonial capital that the seed could survive in small patches, passed quietly between families for the next 400 years. The plant itself never disappeared. Wild amaranth still grows in vacant lots and along roadside ditches across most of North America, the same plant the supermarkets quietly ignored for 150 years. Then, in the 1970s, researchers ran nutritional analyses on it. The seed carried all 9 essential amino acids, which is what nutritionists call a complete protein. By the early 2000s, organic amaranth was on the Whole Foods shelf in a paper bag, about $12 a pound. Marketed alongside quinoa as an ancient superfood. The marketing just leaves out the part where the Spanish tried to burn it out of existence, and the part where it is still growing wild in the vacant lot down the street. Number 11. Ramps. In April, walking the trails in the West Virginia mountains, you can smell wild onions in the wet ground before you see them. The plant is the Appalachian wildleek, and rural families have pulled it from damp, shaded forest soil every spring for as long as anyone remembers. The flavor sits between garlic and green onion, with a heat that lasts in the mouth. Restaurants in Brooklyn and Chicago now pay $20 to $30 a pound for the same plant a kid in Richwood gathers in a paper bag on a Saturday morning. If your great-grandfather kept a small farm in Tennessee or Kentucky, you might know number 10, sorghum. Sweet sorghum syrup was the default American kitchen sweetener through the late 1800s and into the 1940s, especially in the South and the lower Midwest. Cane sugar from the Caribbean and corn syrup from the Midwest pushed it out of the average household pantry. Today, a single pint of small-batch sorghum syrup at a farmer's market or at Whole Foods costs $15 to $20. Most American kids born after 1970 have never tasted it. Number 9. Pumpkin seeds. Every October, before about 1985, almost every American kitchen had a pile of slimy orange pumpkin guts on a newspaper on the counter. The kids roasted some of the seeds, salted them, and threw the rest away. The same seed, dried and bagged at the health food store, now sells for about $8 a pound. The label calls them pepitas, the Mexican word for pumpkin seeds. They have among the highest levels of magnesium of any common plant source, plus zinc, iron, and a complete plant protein. The carving pumpkin in your driveway holds about a cup of them. Number 8. Jerusalem artichoke. Not from Jerusalem, not an artichoke. It is a sunflower relative that grows a knobby tuber underground. Indigenous peoples in eastern North America cultivated it for thousands of years before European contact. The tuber tastes faintly nutty, somewhere between a water chestnut and a potato. Niche grocery stores stock it now as sunchoke at around $6 a pound. It is also one of the best prebiotic foods on earth, denser in inulin than almost any other vegetable. When you think about it, there is something funny about this whole pattern. Each of these plants was once free. Each of them is now expensive. The only thing that changed about the plants themselves is whether or not the big food industry could be bothered to package them. The plants did not get more nutritious in the meantime. They did not become rarer. The grocery aisle simply found a way to sell us what the empty lot next door has been giving away the whole time. Which brings us to number 7, wild grape. If you have ever walked a country fence line in late September in Indiana or Ohio, you have probably smelled wild grapes before you saw them. The wild river grape grows in tangles along almost every Midwestern hedgerow. The skin and seeds carry far more resveratrol than the cultivated table grapes sold in supermarket boxes. A bottle of natural wine made from native varietals, the kind wine bars in Portland and Brooklyn now carry, costs $30 and up. The grapes themselves are still falling off the vine into the dirt every September. Here is the thing I keep coming back to. Plant knowledge takes generations to build. The Aztecs needed thousands of years to figure out what amaranth could do for the human body. The American settler families needed 150 years to work out which weeds in the yard were food and which were poison. And in the span of about 2 generations starting 1955, almost all of that knowledge in this country evaporated. The weeds and muddy plants did not get burned the way the Spanish burned the amaranth fields. They did not get banned. The knowledge just stopped getting passed down. The grandmother who knew which weed was purslane and which weed was the bad one died with her wisdom in her hands. Her daughter, raised on canned green beans and frozen spinach, did not see the point of asking. Her granddaughter has never tasted a real purslane in her life. That is the speed of the thing. A continent of plant knowledge gone in less time than it takes to pay off a mortgage. Number 6. Watercress. Somewhere in the Cumberland Valley, in the spring of 1894, a 13-year-old girl walks out behind her family's farmhouse before sunrise with an oilcloth apron and a sharp pocket knife. The creek runs cold over flat stones. She steps in barefoot and starts cutting watercress just above the waterline, working upstream against the current. Within 20 minutes, she has gathered 4 pounds, more than enough to feed her family of 7 for 2 days. She does this 3 mornings a week, every spring of her childhood. The watercress is so common, so universally available, that her family does not even consider it a vegetable. They consider it grass that happens to be good. This is the one. The plant that the scientific community, after a comprehensive nutrient density scoring study in 2014, ranked as the single most nutrient-dense food on Earth. Higher than kale, higher than spinach, higher than every other vegetable they tested. A perfect 100 on the scoring scale, the only food in the entire study to hit that number. And it grows in any cold creek in America for free. It has been growing in those creeks for as long as we have records of the continent. The leaves are small and round and pepper-sharp, with a flavor somewhere between mustard and arugula, but cleaner. Cooks of that era used it briefly in butter with a pinch of salt. They layered it raw between slices of bread and lard. They tossed it into soups in the last minute of cooking. A single cup of raw watercress carries more vitamin C than an orange, more iron than a serving of spinach, more calcium than a glass of milk, and a class of cancer-protective compounds called glucosinolates that almost no other vegetable contains. By the late 1950s, watercress had quietly vanished from American grocery stores. The supermarket era could not move it. The leaves wilted within hours of being cut. It could not be packaged in a plastic box. It could not be trucked. The American food system simply chose not to deal with it. The plant itself kept doing what it had always done, growing in cold creeks, free in every state east of the Rocky Mountains. Today, Whole Foods sells a plastic box of watercress for $4. Yes, you heard that right. The #1 most nutrient-dense food on Earth is growing wild in every cold water creek in America. Number 5. American persimmon. When most people hear persimmon, they picture the bright orange Asian fruit at the grocery store in winter. The American persimmon is a different plant entirely. It is smaller and brown when ripe, about the size of a walnut. It grows wild from Connecticut to Texas, and it must freeze on the tree before it turns sweet. Southern cooks use the pulp in puddings, breads, and country preserves. The imported Asian persimmons at Whole Foods now cost $3 to $5 each. The native ones still drop on the ground every October. Number 4. Pawpaw, the largest fruit native to North America. It grows wild across the eastern half of the country, with custard soft flesh that tastes like a mango crossed with a banana. The fruit cannot be shipped. It bruises in transit and ripens in 2 days, which is why almost no grocery store in America stocks it. A single pawpaw at a Midwestern farmer's market runs $5 to $8. The trees are full of fruit every September along the river bottoms of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Number 3. Ground cherry, a small yellow fruit enclosed in a delicate paper husk that grows on a low, sprawling plant. It tastes like a pineapple crossed with a tomato. American kitchen gardens carried it through the 1800s as a regular crop. Today, the seeds sell in boutique catalogs for $4 to $6 a packet. Almost no grocery store stocks the fruit at all. Number 2. Black walnut. Native to the eastern half of the United States, it is distinct from the milder English walnut. The flavor is sharper and more resinous, and the nut has a different fat profile, higher in omega-3. Rural families used to gather them by the bushel in late October, husk them in the driveway, and stain their hands brown for 2 weeks. Specialty grocers now sell black walnut meats at $20 a pound or more. The trees are still everywhere in the Midwest, dropping fruit every fall. And finally, number 1, elderberry. The American elderberry still grows wild on fence rows, hedge rows, and along roadsides across most of the eastern and central United States. The clusters of small dark purple berries ripen in August and hang heavy off the branch. Dozens of tiny berries packed into each cluster, the whole thing about the size of a saucer. In every European immigrant kitchen that landed in America, whether German, Polish, Yiddish, or Italian, somebody's grandmother knew how to turn elderberries into syrup. She simmered them down with a little sugar and a stick of cinnamon on a back burner of the stove for an entire afternoon. The result went into a glass jar in the back of the pantry. When somebody in the house came down with a cold or a winter cough, a tablespoon of the syrup went into hot water or just into a spoon. The taste was deep and dark and slightly tart, almost wine-like. That syrup was the standard winter cold remedy in 1,000 small towns through the 1940s and 50s. Then the antibiotic era arrived. The doctor's office had a pill for everything. The grandmother's syrup quietly stopped being made. The modern bottled version of the same syrup, sold under brand names like Sambucol, runs around $25 for a small bottle at the pharmacy. But the plant is climbing the wire behind your shed, the fence behind the gas station, the edge of the field along the back road you take home from work, and it is probably ripe right now. Most of these 20 plants are still here. Some are growing in the cracks of your driveway right now. Some are along the fence line of the parking lot you drove through this morning. The watercress is in the creek behind the truck stop. The elderberry is climbing the wire behind your shed. The purslane is in the soil between your tomato plants in the garden. What we lost was not the plants. What we lost was the knowledge. The recipes that lived in the hands of women who are now older or no longer here did not get written down because nobody thought to write them down. Because eating watercress for free was so normal, it did not deserve a story. And what got built on top of the forgotten knowledge was a marketing category called superfood that now charges you $14 for the same plant the supermarket chains had quietly stopped carrying 50 years earlier. The same plant that fed a Pennsylvania farmhouse for free in 1894. Here is what I want you to do this week. Walk slowly through your own yard, or your own block, or the trail behind your local park. Notice what is growing there. Take a picture of one plant you cannot name. Look it up. There is roughly a 50-50 chance you will find a plant on this list standing in front of you. The same plant your great-grandmother would have recognized in 2 seconds. The same plant that Whole Foods will charge you $8 to put in a plastic box. And when you find one, leave it in the comments. Let me know which of the 20 you have growing in your own yard right now. If you recognized some of the names today or learned a few new ones, share the video with somebody you think would want to know. Family, friends, the neighbor who keeps a garden, or anybody who has ever wondered why so-called superfoods cost what they cost today. I will see you in the next video.